I want you guys to realize there is a bigger picture. And the other more important thing is to understand that at the very, very end of the outline, you will see how I piece this all together. And I will actually show you some real documents with real proof, with real patents to back up my own particular hypothesis. So I appreciate you guys staying from beginning to end, and you're going to want to do that. If you show up late, that's okay. It's not a classroom. Some people state that it's, basically a classroom, but you could always go back and rewind, and of course, all of it's chopped up later. So with that said, let's just finally get into it. Here it is. This is going to start off the outline, and this is actually from Reuters. Let's go ahead and full screen this. As you can see right here, what exactly is the big deal? Well, number one, Russian lawmakers, like it says, approve use of digital assets in international transactions. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you a little bit to the present. I'm going to take you back to the past, and then have you understand the outline from beginning to end. So past, present, maybe a little bit of that future. So back in February, Russian lawmakers, as we know or don't know, on Tuesday approved draft legislation allowing digital assets, financial assets, I should say. These are called DFAs, to be used in international settlements, a move that may enable Moscow to shield some cross-border money flows from international scrutiny. The green light from lawmakers comes as the West, led by the United States, threatens, once again, banks in countries such as Turkey, China, with secondary sanctions for facilitating trade with Russia. As you can see, back to what Russia has in regards to this, also posted the month before. Russian rating agency ACRA sees banks dominating real-world asset tokenized assets. Well, they even cite some things. Russian digital financial asset issuances, at least back in 2023. You got to understand, just because we're in 2024 doesn't mean we're going to get the full report. But even back in 2021, this legislation supporting the tokenization of RWAs and how it took a while for the central banks to authorize issuing platforms. Now, I know where some of you guys are going to go with this. Okay, some of you guys are going to point out, like, are you trying to connect the whole thing with Quant authorized? Well, to a sense, all right. I think that was great timing from what we saw, earlier this year and maybe a little bit last year. But on Ledger Insights, you should also really, really look into the statement of what is called DFA, okay, digital financial assets. When I open that up, it takes us to this here. Let me just pull this up for a second. And all sorts of stuff that has to do with, of course, what? The BRICS nations. So we understand that while Iran, last I checked, is not officially into it, it does seem like they would have no problem getting into the BRICS countries. And for you guys that are newcomers to all this, BRICS is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. But all sorts of citations about it. Iran confirms working with Russia, CBDC, tokenized assets. Russia expects CBDCs to take 5 to 7 years to scale, starting in 2025 earliest. And that key part, earliest. Now, we've been researching a lot of this stuff. And in the research, all roads point to one key thing, and that is a mandate. An actual worldwide mandate, if anything. A lot of people, like myself, consider this the possible flip of the switch. How so? ISO 222, the final mandate, November 2025. Starting earliest 2025, think about it. Think about the terminology. Getting more into this, you're going to see some things that really will raise your eyebrows. So, I'll take you to this. Another part of the outline. Russia expects CBDCs to take 5 to 7 years to scale. Back to the whole thing in 2025. This was in April, this posting. April as in when? This year. Why is this important? Well, in April, the governor of the Bank of Russia, who is Elvira Nobilina, informed State Duma, State Department, about the progress of its central bank digital currency CBDC pilot. Now, that did start August of last year, but it's about the second wave, okay? And that did include some banks, include Russia's largest bank, which is Sber, if I'm pronouncing it right. Probably pronounced it wrong. That's okay. But the point is, they are ready to join this digital ruble pilot. Now, you guys got to also understand, when we get more into the outline, you will see how we line this all up about Russia's announcement of, for example, what are they going to do in regards to picking a blockchain, but more in particular, the BRICS nations. Read this statement as well. Here we tried in experimental mode for foreign economic international payments. We have long agreed to use digital currencies for foreign economic settlements. It seems to me that it would be desirable for us to quickly adopt this regime. Work it out, see what it is, what is possible, and basically introduce it to the general legislation, okay? And those committees, of course, with Russia. Is there more talk about crypto? Is there more talk about legislation? Yes, there is. So, domestically speaking, DFAs do not serve as payment instruments, but Russia recently passed legislation allowing them for cross-border payments. United States, OFAC, stepped in and extended its sanctions list to cover the first 5 licensed DFA platforms. So again, action reaction. Now back to the thing about crypto. It says, however, the OFAC list also included some crypto platforms for offshore payments, including Rossbank Partner B Crypto. Now, when you go to them, if you're wondering about them, a whole other thing opens up, and I don't want to get into the deepest rabbit hole on this one, but citation from last year, Russia Rossbank to start using crypto for what? Cross-border payments. This is interesting as well because I think even some of you guys listening tonight do have some mixed reactions. So again, Ledger Insight's been killing with the BRICS coverage. Russia gives mixed signals about common BRICS digital currency. April 29, 2024. And it's a little bit more about the whole thing of that summit from last year, citing what happened then and having an update about what's going on now, but much anticipated announcement basically about those local currencies for cross-border payment. How can you have local currencies for cross-border payment? Well, easy. There's lots of things that is mentioned with that, especially when it comes to pairings. Comes to pairings, I should say. BRICS in itself expanded from 5 to 10 members, and Russia is currently the organization chair. Back in April, Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov, I can't say his name, discussed the topic, saying that a common currency is not a current priority. Okay. Says, on the other hand, he said it would be possible to move very quickly, implying a solution that could be less than a year away. Less than a year away. Okay, so that was April. So that would put you into 2025. Now, this is where it gets extremely interesting. After February's BRICS meeting, look at this, guys. Russia spoke about a BRICS bridge platform for payments without mentioning digital currency. 2 BRICS members, China and the United Arab Emirates, are involved in, of course, Project mBridge. Now, we already know about Project mBridge. It says a similarly named cross-border central bank digital currency initiative using individual digital currencies for cross-border payments is a significant different approach than using, of course, common currency. I'll read this one more part. Governor of the Bank of Russia, Elvira Nubolina, has previously spoken about the complexity of creating a single BRICS currency. She made the comments before BRICS membership expanded. So that definitely caught my attention because, I mean, Channing is right. RSN, big time, right? I mean, it's literally spelling it out for us. And the other thing is Russian digital financial assets. Again, back to that term. Why does that keep popping up? Legal framework for tokenized assets. Huh. All right. So as we know, when it comes to Russia, especially the whole thing of what led into sanctions of the United States and Russia because, Ukraine and so on. Well, eventually, at some point during the discussion, this will get brought up. So you will see here that says with sanctions, the two countries are locked out of SWIFT, as in, the traditional SWIFT, or not SWIFT blockchain, guys. I know some of you got, every now and then somebody will mention that. But for cross-border payments, it can't easily trade in dollars or euros. Hence, they have resorted to what? Local currency payments. Again, action, reaction. Supply meets demand. But that may not be ideal. And of course, Putin and I'm sure his cabinet and so on have recognized that. They're not dummies. Just because we're not on best terms with them and so on doesn't mean they're dummies. They're pretty smart people. But it says, when the topic of Iran-Russia digital currency arose in 2023, did we forget about this as well, guys? I think we did. Digital financial assets such as tokenized gold were not allowed to be used for payments in Russia. Iranian counterparties would have to onboard these DFA platforms to use digital financial assets, DFA, such as tokenized gold. They'll likely need to open a Russian bank account as well. See how that drives demand for what the BRICS nations are doing? And back to this, look at this terminology. Given that friction, because Gilbert Verdian is always talking about friction, ACRA suggests the creation of an international exchange operator capable of connecting Russian information systems with foreign platforms. That looks like a time-consuming solution. All right, so I'm not going to get into all that, but 2025, and it says the early state for Russian Iranian CBDC settlements. Okay. Interesting. All right. Two more things from Ledger Insights before we get into the community breakdown. Russia to start using CBDC for cross-border payments in 2025. Now look at this. Here's a real recent update. Now, this really flew under the radar, and that's why I'm including it in the outline, of course, tonight. Look at this for a second. So, what are they intending to do, as in Russia? Well, they're intending to perform its first, guys, cross-border payments using the digital ruble in the second half of 2025. Think about that for a second. So the mandate for ISO 222 is November 2025, and most likely, from what I've gathered, it's going to be late 2020 or late November 2025. But central bank digital currency transactions with China or even Belarus, of course, are on the cards. Opportunities to include DFA as a payment method in international trade. Think about that, with the option being actively discussed. Now, this is a shift. And the reason why I'm bringing this to you guys' attention tonight is, for the first time, you're not seeing a narrative of it is Russia, it is only BRICS of what they're going to do, and that is it or bust. The shift is what? It's cash. The focus on cash. The focus on getting out of the dependency for the world on the US dollar. That's one of the main things I want everybody to take away from all of this. So we're going to take you to here. This site, if you're wondering, is called investforesight.com. Russia sees budget surplus again. This is June 25th. So this is pretty darn recent when it comes to the BRICS coverage. So what is this? Well, do they really have a surplus? Looks like the answer is yes. It says uneven spending and generous front loading of large expenditures continue to affect the federal budget balance. In May, it returned to a surplus of 501 billion rubles, which is 5.6 billion American dollars, after posting a deficit in April and a surplus, though, in March. Okay, so I thought you said they have a surplus, Max. Hear me out. Says the overall gap between Russia's revenues and expenditures decreased by a third from 1.484 trillion rubles, which is $16.6 billion at the end of the 4 months, to basically 983 billion rubles at the end of the 5 months. Relative to the size of the economy, the accumulated deficit fell from 0.8% to 0.5%. So they are doing some things, just because they had a short deficit, they're doing some things. Okay. What about the surplus? Any more about that? Yes. May's impressive surplus was formed due to significant reduction in spending. We do the opposite of that, right? Here in the United States, it's just spend, and it's just crazy, right? So it says while revenues shrank less significantly in March, Federal Reserves reached 3.7 trillion rubles, which is 41.3 billion, dwindling to 3 trillion in April and only 2.6 trillion in May. But you can see what happens with this. So there's a quote. Let's read it again from this guy. For all the intense sanctions rhetoric, think about that, the Russian budget is showing a surprising good balance. This is from economist Sergei Kestanov, associate professor at RENEPA. Quote, as long as oil prices and oil production in Russia remain at this level or higher, the Russian budget is not in danger. Right, it's not in danger. If anything, they're probably going to continue to have a surplus. All right, the final part in regards to the articles before we get to the community outline. In Russia, back in 2024, March 2024, Russia again ranked among what? Leading suppliers of metals. This should catch your guys' attention a little bit more because I know some of you guys are into like XPR, Proton, and some of these other things, right? So, rank among the leading suppliers of metals to the European Union. Again, to the European Union. When I show you the thing that will wrap this all up, you really, in my opinion, it will open your eyes if it's not already open already. It says with the sales reaching their highest level since May 2023. That's important to note because this right here going upwards, it's not going upwards for us. In March of 2024, Europe's iron and steel imports from Russia surged 70%. The largest buyer was Belgium, accounted for example, 130.5 million. Imagine that's euros, followed by Italy with 85 million, Denmark, so on and so forth. The European Union's aluminum imports from Russia also increased significantly by 29% compared to the previous year. Increase in supplies to Germany was especially noticeable, as the country's imports increased fivefold. Spain, Poland, you can see what's going on here. Look at this. Before the consumers of Russia, steel and aluminum, as before, the main consumers of those are the European construction industry, mechanical engineering, aircraft, and even packaging. Despite the embargo, look at this, guys, on the import of a number of steel products from Russia, European Union countries seem to have failed to fully comply with the requirements. Although technically there was no violations because of those types of semi-finished steel products, metals are exempted from the sanctions. In addition, embargoed goods are often imported via third countries, which makes it possible to circumvent these restrictions. So that's incredibly interesting to see how all this comes together.
You talked about the digital wallets, right?
Yeah, especially when it came to the whole thing of RSN. Yeah.
Yep, RSN, right? So think of it like this: is before it was RSN, it was RLN, even here in America. And you had a lady from Citi. She was doing an interview. She had a pink blazer on, and she talked about her client Merce and how they used the Fed's canal, and once their payment went through the canal, it transferred from U.S. currency into whatever the other currency was, and when it settled inside of that person's wallet, being able to do it, not me sending you Ethereum and you receiving Ethereum, but quote unquote, me sending you Ethereum and you receiving Dogecoin. Does this make sense?
Yeah, of course.
Having that universal wallet that you were speaking of makes these things possible that they're now talking about publicly. It's just like with mBridge. It was just this past January that they had a public showing of, I believe it was the AUE, and I believe it was Korea or China, as far as that transfer was concerned. But there had already been multiple private transactions that had already taken place. So once they bring something public to let the public know, those things are literally already solidified. They've already been worked on. They've already been tried, tested, and proven, so that they don't look like they have egg on their face. Like prime example, even with Quant real fast and LackChain. Think about this. LackChain, as of this month, has been live for a year. You now have 11 or 12 countries in Central and South America and Mexico using the US digital dollar, because that is what they're settling in, digital dollars. They are literally, like Gilbert is saying, they're using it there first, and they're going to eventually connect it up to the US out of his mouth, because what they are doing is, this is the testing ground. They're making sure that everything is safe, is resilient, is future proof. So once it does make it to the actual American stage, into the hands of American consumers, it can be trusted. Why? Because it's already been running for years, and we have years of research and ledgers on the topic.
That's great perspective. Obviously, you've been studying this, and that's awesome. So I do give you a dab on that. What we're going to do now, guys, is we're going to jump into the community outline.
There's no doubt that a technology architecture such as mBridge limits the ability by which a single country can intervene in the transactions of other countries. And that's one of the main attractive features of a distributed ledger architecture. So in that sense, there is no doubt in my mind that the ability of the United States to weaponize dollar-based transactions through its ability to influence the operations of SWIFT will be curtailed going forward.
Hello, everyone. Today, I'm excited to welcome back Warwick Powell. Warwick is adjunct professor at Queensland University of Technology in Australia and a senior fellow at Taihe Institute in Beijing. Warwick is also an expert in all things blockchain and digital technologies, which is the focus of our conversation today. Project mBridge has been making headlines in recent months. Blockchain-based mBridge does not support settlements made in US dollars, from what I understand. And this may mean that once completed, it will become the system that will accelerate de-dollarization around the world. Effectively, its goal is to become the basis for a global alternative financial system, the system that will support multipolarity.
It is quite slow and is quite expensive. The principal ways that this process has been implemented in recent times has been through what everyone knows as the SWIFT messaging platform. And that enables participating banks to communicate with each other, to send secure messages in accordance with a standard format so that they, in effect, can understand what the instructions are from the other side. This process can take many days for the ledgers to be adjusted, and the fees and charges that are incurred in this process are quite high. So we've got a problem of cost and time. Now, those problems, of course, pre-existed the more recent set of problems. And those recent set of problems have gone to how this particular set of institutions has become weaponized. By weaponized, I mean that they have now become part of a process through which one particular party in particular, namely the United States, has been able to cause the operators of SWIFT to exclude the banks from certain countries or specific banks from being able to exchange messages with others. In other words, kick them out of the key information sharing arrangements that enable cross-border payments to work. mBridge begins to tackle all of these issues. So the way that mBridge does it is that it does it with a distributed ledger or a blockchain. The blockchain architecture is established in two basic layers. The first layer is a layer in which the participating central banks operate nodes, their own computers, which maintain a copy of the ledger. And those nodes also have the authority to be part of the consensus mechanism, which is the way in which this shared ledger is updated. The second layer of this architecture is the layer of the participating commercial banks. Now, those commercial banks also have nodes, and those nodes have a copy of the same ledger. The difference is that the commercial banks don't have the authority to participate in the ledger updates directly. So only the participating central banks actually have the authority to participate in the consensus mechanism that finally settles what the updates are. This distributed infrastructure enables the contemporaneous updating of all accounts. So now we've solved the time problem, because instead of having to wait for messages to be moved from one party to the other and for updates to ledgers to be made, they are made at the same time. In being able to make them at the same time, we also reduce costs. And importantly, because it's a distributed ledger where all the participating central banks are members of the consensus mechanism, no single bank can censor or block or amend transactions. That's the basic design, if you will, and the operations of mBridge to date. So, for instance, most of this architecture has focused, of course, on the settlement of money accounts. But when we're dealing with cross-border transactions, we're also dealing with the movements of goods. So the ways in which this money settlements architecture interacts with data related to supply chains is likely to be one of the next frontiers that will be addressed, not just by mBridge itself, because mBridge has a very narrow remit, but by participating organizations in industry, in technology, and ultimately in the area of trade and supply chains. So this MVP, which is now out, I think opens up the next chapter for mBridge to become more generalized and to reach into the real world of cross-border trade, not just cross-border transactions, but cross-border trade. The prevailing institutions and technologies that have supported cross-border transactions over the last 70 years are really reaching the end of their use-by date. And I mean by that the realization that these systems and institutions are expensive, they take more time than they really should, and of course, more recently, they've become prone to censorship or weaponization. So all of these factors are coming together where somebody who is relatively neutral in all of this, but is simply interested in a technology and a governance regime that enables confidence and predictability in ledger adjustments across borders, they're all looking for better ways of doing this. And distributed ledger technologies, supported by well-established mature institutions in countries as well as cross-border institutions like the BIS, hold a lot of potential to meeting these ambitions and goals.
How important will Project mBridge become for de-dollarization? What role do you expect it to play?
Look, the project could play a very important role, either directly or indirectly. Directly, of course, as a piece of infrastructure itself, it could certainly facilitate national currency-based trade settlements that don't involve the exchange of national currencies into US dollars and then the exchange of US dollars back into national currencies as the way in which trade settlements are made. The other way in which I think it can play a very important role is the learnings that have come from the development of mBridge as the project itself. The learnings in terms of the technology design and also in terms of the non-technological aspects of governing a consensus-based network of organizations. Now, those learnings, I think, are going to play an important role ultimately in the way in which BRICS is going to see its own national currency-based trade settlement system unfold. So there's no doubt in my mind that the work that has been done in mBridge is going to play a critical role in the processes of currency multipolarity as that unfolds over the next, 5 to 10 years.
mBridge is an alternative to SWIFT, as you just mentioned. What does mBridge mean for the United States foreign policy in terms of its ability to wage economic warfare and to target non-aligned governments? Is that going to considerably take away that ability? Or do you think that eventually, with the evolution of the payment systems and multipolar world order and multi-currency transactions, is there going to be a workaround this particular system that would allow countries to still effectively exercise the right to limit the use of their currencies, even within the system.
There's no doubt that a technology architecture such as mBridge limits the ability by which a single country can intervene in the transactions of other countries. And that's one of the main attractive features of a distributed ledger architecture. So in that sense, there is no doubt in my mind that the ability of the United States to weaponize dollar-based transactions through its ability to influence the operations of SWIFT will be curtailed going forward. Now, this has already been happening for a number of years, of course, well before mBridge was first designed and developed. Countries like China, countries like Russia have been working on independent bank-to-bank messaging systems separate to SWIFT to enable their institutions to message each other in a reliable and secure way so that the ledgers in those institutions can be adjusted accordingly. Now, those interbank messaging systems that have been developed since really 2014, 2015 have already been playing important roles over the last 2 years as the world, particularly in terms of cross-border trade, has explored and ultimately implemented de-dollarization. And a classic case in point, of course, is the ways in which the trade between China and Russia have been settled. These days, about 95% of Russia's trade is settled in anything but the US dollar and the euro. And that goes for its trade with China as well. Much of that trade with China is settled in RMB, though a substantial portion of that is also settled in the ruble. We're also seeing that happen in terms of Russia's trade with India and India's trade with the UAE, where India and the UAE are trading with national currencies. So this network of national currency-based trade settlements is starting to gain momentum. It's certainly secured a foothold by virtue of the trade between Russia and China. And what that shows is that it's possible and that it can be done relatively quickly. For a lot of people, the idea of migrating away from a US dollar-based or dominated trade settlement system was actually inconceivable. Very, very slow process of evolution. But quite clearly, when there is a pressing need, as there has been since the Ukraine conflict took on its current turn in early 2022 and the sanctions on Russia were imposed, the change can happen incredibly fast. So the adaptive ability of organizations, enterprises, and banks, given existing technologies, to go to new systems of cross-border settlements is really there for all of us to see.
The BRICS and to alternative ways to get financing is the fact that nowadays geopolitical tensions really make them worried, and they're worried that they may not be able to remain aligned or remain in a position that is acceptable to the United States, right? And so if they choose to pursue their own interests, if they choose to lean one way or another, that is not approved by this party, the United States, then they may really pay twice, right? They may end up not being able to develop economically. They may effectively face really severe constraints, even domestic instability as the result of those. So they're really motivated to move away from the system that is seen as extremely risky and move towards the alternative system, which mBridge is expected to be supportive of.
Yeah, look, BRICS, I think, has a number of really interesting attributes, if you will, and why that makes it attractive to many developing nations. often Western observers criticize BRICS for being incoherent and lacking this sort of sense of common purpose. It talks about the diversity of all the member countries and how they have their differences of opinions and differences amongst each other. But that's actually why BRICS is strong. BRICS actually doesn't have a particularly, what I guess I would call a very thick moralizing approach to how countries come together. There isn't a single party that seeks to dictate particular terms around domestic issues, and it supports the ability for participating member countries to interact with each other as sovereign nations and to pursue economic development and social development on its own terms. The BRICS Bank, the new development bank, is also moving down the path of further supporting national sovereignty through the issuance of credit in national currencies. Now, the BRICS Bank at the moment has about 75% of its loans denominated in US dollars and 25% in national currencies, with a plan that over the next 3 years for the proportion of national currency denominated financing to grow to over 30%. Now, this is a significant move. You sort of think, well, 25% to over 30% doesn't sound like a lot. But when the total value of the loan book grows and the financing balance sheet grows, these shifts in percentages represent very major evolutions in the composition of the denomination of the financial instruments concerned. So we're going to see enterprises and governments in different parts of the world through their membership of BRICS to be able to access development finance denominated in their own national currencies. And that deals with the problems that I described earlier. You're not going to be exposed to currency exchange volatility problems. You're not going to be exposed to the challenges that could be imposed upon you as a result of US domestic monetary policy. And ultimately, it also means that your interactions with each other, particularly as institutions or technologies like mBridge roll out, you won't be exposed to an institutional and technical architecture that enables one party to capriciously censor or in some other way intervene in your dealings with others. All of this makes institutions like BRICS actually incredibly effective and attractive to countries around the world. And we're seeing that with the amount of interest expressed towards participating in BRICS from countries in Africa, Asia, South America, etc.
Well, first, let's start with the fact that he definitely just solidified that DLT is being used. So many people say, oh, okay, they're doing cross-border payments, but they're not using crypto. They're not using, blockchain. Well, without a shadow of a doubt, he just solidified that, yes, they are using blockchain. Yes, they are using what the government's call DLT, distributed ledger technology, in their processes for building out cross-border payments and settlement with countries within the BRICS nations, which was like, okay, that's what's up. Everything that we've been talking about, everything that we've been covering, we've been sharing, we've been right on the money with. Then the fact that they did, I love the fact, first give her a shout out. She asked the good questions. Her questions were spot on, phenomenal. A couple times I was thinking something, and that very next question she brought up, because when she was on a certain part, I was like, but what about the petrodollar? And as soon as I'm thinking that, she comes out with it, I was like, yes, you asked the good questions. But to see that it's not blind on the rest of the world, how certain powers can bully them via currency and via structures, and how they are now working on different back routes to be able to say, hey, it's not okay if you do that. And if you continue to do that, well, at this point it's done. We're going to start interoperating inside other currencies other than yours. And like the man said, it may only be like a 5 or 6% jump over the next, 5 years. We have to think about it. Countries don't play checkers. They don't play day to day. They play chess. They are very strategic. They are very well thought. And when they make a move, they strike to win. Okay. So yeah, that 5% in 5 or 10 years, but think 20 years, think 30 years, think 40 years, think 50 years, because that's how they think. And they think eventually we'll be at a point where that US dominance won't be, 70%, it'll be 10%. Then what does that mean for the US currency? So you guys have to think not like day-to-day investors, but think how these big boys, these institutions, and these companies and countries are thinking when it comes to these things, like even things like Quant and getting these patents. A lot of these patents don't even expire into 2040 and 2035. And, we're talking a decade plus. And if you don't think that they're already working on new patents with new technology, then you're mistaken. It's just like when an Overledger first was initially launched, it was 3 lines of code. Well, that last update to Overledger is now 0 lines of code. And if you don't think that they're putting in agreements or amendments to these patents to ensure that as their technology advances, they advance along with it, then you're mistaken. It's the same thing with these countries. These countries are positioning themselves for the next 50, 60 years of commerce within their borders. And they're positioning themselves to be independent of any one entity and to be self-sufficient within their own currency. And that is major, knowing how much, if you think about this, one of the only things that the US exports is dollars. Goods and services, very few, far in between. We are a big importer. We import from everybody, but we export US dollars. Well, what does that mean for the US dollar when that export starts to almost like a bathtub with a hole in the bottom? You're putting water in, but as much water as you're putting in is leaking out the bottom. What happens when you actually realize that there's a hole in the bottom? Because these countries are no longer holding your currency because they have no need for your currency. Granted, 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years. But what does that mean when all of these US dollars are now being re-injected back into our circulating supply? Think of it like crypto. Think of it like a circulating supply. Think of it like people give Shiba, a big bad block because it was a 1 quadrillion, tokens at initial launch, and then they cut that in half or whatever the case may be. But it's still a huge circulating supply. Well, the US dollar has a astronomical circulating supply. What happens when that circulating supply is no longer in the demand that it is today? What does that mean for the currency? What does that mean for the country? What does that mean for how we operate day to day and the prices of goods and services? It's going to be extremely high. Even when we were watching the video and he explained, or maybe you were reading something, you explained, I believe it was a couple trillion ruble was only like a few billion US dollars. What happens when that's the reverse? Because we have so many circulating supply within our borders. Think about that, you guys. Think about, this is the reason why countries are now positioning themselves not to have to rely on something that potentially is going to be catastrophic in the long run, because of the amount that has been generated and created over, definitely, like Larry Fink said, I believe in that video, 23 years, but more so, even more importantly, in the past 4 years, how much money has been generated. It's an insane amount of money, you guys. Insane amount of money. And no one is truly looking at the ramifications of all of this money or circulating supply actually coming into the economy. And these countries see it because they don't play checkers, they play chess, and they're now strategically making moves. So as our bathtub weakness starts to show, they'll already be putting water inside of a safe, secure bathtub of their own, utilizing their own currencies, making sure that their countries are independent and resilient.
That's some great intel. Great explanation. You're paying attention. Let's shift things over to China, because that's another member of the BRICS nations. Okay. So, with that also said, here you have this PDF, which is called Blockchain as a Financial Infrastructure. What is China's focus? Because they are part of the BRICS nations. This is by Eugenio Reggiani. All right. Talks about a 13th 5-year national information plan. All right. And look at this statement. Made in China 2025. National guidelines to create portfolio of national assets to export abroad. Interesting. Why so interesting? Well, it's because of this. You know how we always talk about standards when it comes to ISO TC 307 standard? What do you guys see here? Operational standards, main operational standards, managed by PBOC and SAFE. But China's cross-border interbank payments system, which is called CIPS. Have you guys ever heard of this? What about this? What about this? Read that for yourself. HVPS, High Value Payment System. Now, I want to pause on that for a second because, like it says, it handles mainly intercity and local credit transfers above a given value. Everything that's been presented tonight, what is one of the main things they talked about? What they're locally doing, right? Remember everything that we shared earlier on the outline from Leisure Insights? So that is a big deal to pay attention, because a lot of people have been mentioning, they're like, oh, this stuff ain't going to be worth that much. The hell it ain't. It's going to have a high value. Back to the outline when it comes to the World Bank. Back to that book from who? Underdog Researcher of the Underdog Research Channel. Because what does the World Bank mention? They specifically mention Ripple's XRP. They specifically mention Stellar, XLM, and talking about global stable coins, but not pegged to a 1-1 value. But what about this? A payment system. Remember, it's also about the platform, is it not? Yes, it is. CIPS, in this reference, let's full screen this for a second too, you will see that HVPS is what? Fully compliance with ISO 222. All right. What about Quant? Yeah, what about Quant? Look at this for a second. Technical standards. Bottom part, what does it say, you guys? Issued by PBOC and is member of what? ISO TC 307, which is what? The Quant Network Standard. Wow, okay. Is that all Max has? Well, of course not. It's not all I have. But I'm going to take you to this next part. This is good, because from this Medium page, it says Blockchain International Standards Organization, China will dominate. Basically states back in 2018, and again, I'm going to show you another thing about action reaction. Back in 2018, there was a meeting. A Blockchain International Standardization Organization decided that China will dominate, absolutely dominate, blockchain data flow and data classification research. All right, a little bit more about this. Back then, China was an active member of the technical committee. And who's cited here? My God, who is cited here? How come nobody referenced this in the past? Look at this. ISO TC 307 was held in London. China was an active member, flew under the radar. Technical committee sent delegation to attend this meeting. The delegation was composed of 13 experts from different domestic companies, research institutions, organized by ISO TC 307, domestic technology counterparts, China, Electronic Standardization Institute. Is there more? My God, Max, why do I have to sit through all that to get to this part? Because I wanted you to understand the bigger picture. Look at this. Among them, the China-led classification and ontology technical specifications, as well as international standards for the reference architecture of the joint editor, will continue to advance in an orderly manner. China also submitted group standards for what? Data format specification. Boom, back to everything that Dr. Powell talked about. And then on top of that, the other research. In that particular meeting, working proposals for the development of what? Data format standards. My God, look at this. Discussion at the meeting decided that China will lead the new work project called Data Flow, Data Taxonomy for Blockchain Distributed Ledger Technologies. Who's this? Dr. Zhao Dan Tang, not from the Wu-Tang clan, but from the Institute of Standardization, served as the project leader, prepared for relevant research report submitted back in 2018. How about a little bit more about this? China's blockchain standards global blockchain standards started in 2018. Now look at this also. The Ministry of Industry and Information Technology Industry Standards Division, National Standardization Administration Committee, the China Electronic Standardization Institute organized the quote China block. Think about how that sounds, okay? And more importantly, China back in 2017 released the world's first group block reference architecture standard and submitted its contributor to who? Quant's network standard, or the ISO TC 307 standard, the foundation for building on blockchain, advancing international standards for reference architecture. What architecture? There's a citation, AWI T23257. Look at this, it gets better. In terms of standards development, the direction in data, back in 2017, China issued block data format, specification, group standard. At the same time, Quant, because that's their standard, has not yet begun to lay out the direction of data standardization, right? Because if anything, been working on this for years, but the meeting was in fact held in China, and most importantly, was also creating all these standards. We're jumping down this part. Look at this quote. China Blockchain Tech and Application Development White Paper back in 2018 will be officially released in June 2018. Already happened. And at the same time, what do we have? Quant's ISO TC 307 case study team worked on case studies and application guidance. Application guidance. What the heck happened from there? Well, let's take you to the next part. Look at this. This is from CoinDesk. This is also back in 2018. China poised to form that blockchain standards, right? And most importantly, when we go further down, you will see that they cite Quant. How so? Well, CoinDesk states that the country was participating as being a member of ISO TC 307 Commission. Right. Quant's Commission for Standardization? How so? Well, because they focused on standard frameworks for blockchain use, authentication back then. So all of this was already being built. Now, let's take you over to why I referenced HVPS. Listen to this. This is from Swift. This will make your head spin. Swift for high value payment systems, RTGS. So you see how this is all coming together. Look at this. High value payment systems, HVPS, are at the heart. You read that right. The heart of the financial ecosystem. They need to offer efficient clearing and settlement services for large value and high priority payments. How so? Well, it's going to need to ensure the resiliencies enough to withstand a variety of threats to security integrity. Swift supports more than 80 HVPS, providing common standards in a highly secure and resilient messaging service. Okay, but you mentioned the whole thing of BRICS. I did mention the whole thing of BRICS. What about the BIS? What about clearing? What about payment? What about settlement systems in China? Boom, look at this for a second. This will also drive you crazy when you get more into the weeds. So, boom, high value payment system. This comes from bis.org. It is called the CPMI for all the nerds. Look what it mentions, guys. HVPS, high value payment system. Look what's also right below it, interbanking payment system. Look at this for a second. PBC has developed several interbank systems, high value payment system, RTGS system, bulk electronic payment system. And then back to the whole thing there, how they said that they're heart of it. China has set up the architecture with the payment systems, the People's Bank of China. Backbone, payment systems, banking institutions as the main part of systems such as the interbank card transaction clearing system. Okay, who are the three main providers? Well, it's China's central bank depository. You have Shanghai Clearing House. And you have China Securities Depository Clearing Corporation. Is there institutional aspects? Yes. They even have laws. It's all referenced here. Boom, it's all there. Okay, and that's referenced from the BIS. And then we just talked about the whole thing of, for example, what? Project mBridge? I mean, we linked everything in regards to what Dr. Powell was saying. Is this it? Is this all Maximus has? Now, guys, listen to me. Pay attention. If everything just went past your head, you have got to see this. This is the bombshell moment. Please pay attention to this. Even if you're talking about Carolina pogo sticks, watch this for a second. All right? Let's pull this up. Oh my goodness. What do we have here? We have this. It's a patent. What does it say, guys? It says blockchain communication and ordering. CN 111433803A. Okay, what the heck is this? It's an abstract about disclosures of implementing a method for maintaining record transaction sequences occurring on one or more blockchains. Huh. Okay, what about data storage? Yes, data store. What about more blockchains? Yes, all that. What about plural data transactions? All that. Okay, who's the inventor of this? Well, that's all in Chinese. I can't read that. Who's this thing called Current Assignee Fastnet Network Limited? Max, this is nothing burger. Is it? Is it? Because guess what? Look at this for a second. What do you see there for a second? My God, what the heck do you see here in a second? Let's blow this up a little bit more. You see this. It's in Chinese overledger. What the hell is this? DLT. What the heck is going on? Look at this for a second. Let's jump down to this. Let's also open up this in another tab. This one's going to be kind of hard to see. A little bit blurry. Look at that. It's the same thing, basically. Overledger. Overledger? So what the heck is this thing, all right, called, Fastnet? Remember how we just talked about that? Fastnet. Because people are definitely going to, inquiring minds want to know, right? So as I jumped over to this, I said to myself, inventor, who the heck is this inventor? And most importantly, I don't know what that is. You go over here. This doesn't say nothing. This is giant nothing burger. Max has wasted my time. Well, guess what? The interpretation of that text, when you go to Google Translate, says what? Gilbert Verdi. Actually, it's Verdian. And it does cite another person, right? Paolo Tasco, whatever his name is. Co-founder of Quant Network. So was I able to find out any more information in regards to all this? And most importantly, who the heck this is? Fastnet Network Ltd. Why don't they just say their name is freaking Quant? Right. Because, want to know something? Jumping back to this. Very interesting that the classification is buying, selling, or leasing transactions. The reason why I'm citing that is because of what? Because earlier in the outline, it was labeled that this is some of the stuff that the BRICS nations was talking about, leasing transactions, because they haven't completely built their own thing. But guess what? This was all originally filed in 2017, and then there was an application filed by who? Fastnet Network Ltd. And guess what does the icing on the cake, guys? Status. It's pending. Think about it. Think about it for a second. It is pending because we haven't got an answer yet in regards to what the BRICS nations blockchain is doing. That's the bombshell. That's the story I'm sticking to. I thought it was incredibly interesting. I try to find out more information in regards to specifically Fastnet Network Limited. Wasn't able to find Jack Dilly squat. I used other search engines and so on. Couldn't find it. But if anybody in the space of researchers wants to look more into it, or you have access to other networks as you travel, be very interesting to see what happens.
If managing your crypto feels like solving a puzzle, it's time to switch to Decent Wallet. Say goodbye to complicated setups and hello to Decent Wallet, the hassle-free solution to your digital currency needs. With just a few taps, you can manage, track, and secure your crypto with unmatched ease. And here's the best part. Grab your Decent Wallet at a discounted price by using the referral link below. Don't miss out on making your crypto experience smoother and more secure.